Perspective is something I feel everyone needs to have. This isn't that difficult, as everybody should have their own initial perspective on any given subject by just purely existing. The real skill, however, would of course be the ability to have multiple perspectives on any subject, and that's usually something that not many people bother with and even less master. Now, when you are trying to solve a mystery, locking yourself to one perspective is dangerous, or, well, rather boring, because you're not going to be able to solve anything. You cannot figure out why a person did a thing unless you can understand that person, get to know their perspective, and then eventually answer the great question, why? One thing I've noticed with mystery and anime is how they like to bring up the topic of perspective, especially at the beginning, and then almost immediately they forget about it as other plot-related elements get introduced and become more relevant. But today we are going to be looking at a series that is literally all about perspective. But it is done in a way that doesn't beat it over your head. It's not the kind of show that's just like, oh, I need to solve the mystery. What if I look at it from a different angle? I joke about this, but apparently saying that phrase to yourself magically makes the solution appear. Ladies, gentlemen, and others, my name is Arcada, and welcome to Glass Reflection today. Hyouka. Let's jam. Now, when I said that the show does not mercilessly beat perspective over your head, I mean it. It's there in the beginning, as our main character Hotaro describes high school as people wanting to live a rose-colored life, one of fun and merriment, while he himself would prefer a grayer-colored world. I remember saying that Tomoko from Watamote was like my spirit animal because of her social anxieties, and I almost feel like I have a similar connection to Hotaro for similar reasons. His mentality is that doing things in life takes too much energy, and in an effort to conserve energy, if he doesn't have to do something, he won't. Unfortunately, he has a surprising knack for figuring out the unexplainable, being able to logically map out a plausible reasoning for most situations. The only problem is he doesn't have the correct personality to actively want to use this skill on his own. Enter Chitanda, the walking ball of curiosity with glowing amethyst eyes. Well, Chitanda is shown to be rather book-smart and from a particularly well-off family. In the world of practicality, she can be a little slow, but this is where her lust for explanations come in. Throughout the show, to move along whatever plots an episode may have, the catalyst will ultimately be either Chitanda discovering or being told one part of an unsolved mystery, either within the school or elsewhere. Wanting to know answers, she immediately turns to Hotaro, eyes aglow, and says the required spell to awaken him from his gray slumber. And he obliges, if only to get her off his back. They then go into a rather well-animated cutscene describing the idiosyncrasies of who or whatever had caused this latest thing that Chitanda is curious about, before eventually reaching an understandable conclusion, as all good mysteries do. You see, that's the thing. One could claim that Hyouka is a mystery show, but one could also claim that Hyouka is a traditional Kyoto Annie slice of life. It's really neither. The stories never contain any conflict, nor do our characters ever have any stake in the situation. They act purely for the sake of curiosity. Now, the stories are indeed engaging, and like mysteries, they give me that desire to try and solve the problem before the solution is revealed, something I also look forward to. But at the end of it all, with Hyouka, it doesn't really scratch that itch of mine. So then perhaps it is just a slice of life, but with mystery elements. Depends. What's your definition of slice of life? When talking about a Kyoto Annie work, tradition usually falls on referring to Lucky Star, one of their previous works, where the definition of slice of life was more so just a distinct lack of any actual plot. In this case, however, Hyouka actually has some decent plots, even though it's not involved in any quote-unquote mystery arcs. The show appears to be more the kind of slice of life that takes the definition of everyday life, in that the characters are put through situations that the audience themselves can relate to, the kinds of things that would happen in their own lives. The only flaw in this is that the perfect combination of character types that exist in the show are unlikely to actually appear in anyone's real life. For a time, I almost felt like the series was attempting to be less of a mystery show in and of itself, and more of a meta-critique on the genre. This is more so evident in one particular arc where the main characters are trying to determine the intent of a writer who was tasked with making a mystery script for a class film project. With the help of the show's self-proclaimed database of information and the general interest in mystery fiction that some of the characters have, the show in that arc liked to bring up a lot of tropes and motifs that the genre is known for, after which of course the show chooses to not really follow any of them or bring them up in episodes beyond that. The only exception of course being the wonderful arc later in reference to Agatha Christie. One could look at the mystery aspect of the show and overall say that it's rather mundane, and I wouldn't begrudge them from that opinion because in some ways it is rather valid, but on the other hand, I would have to ask if the possibility exists that Hyouka was never meant to be a mystery series in the first place, as it never really tries to be suspenseful or dramatic. What the series seems to want to do is use its seemingly mundane mysteries not as a means of entertainment for the mysteries themselves, but as tools to further along the show's various character developments. One thing that is apparent throughout the show's entire plot is that after each and every arc, at least one character walks away from the experience changed. Perhaps they learned something about the world that changed them, or perhaps they learned something about themselves that made them look at their own life from a different angle. What I've come to believe is that Hyouka is not trying to be a mystery anime or a slice of life anime, but instead its own weird, indescribable amalgamation. Part mystery, part everyday life, and even part romance depending on how you look at it, and once again, we are back to the topic of perspective. Speaking of perspective, have I mentioned yet that visually this show looks amazing? Because it does. There is a particular standard that you can expect from Kyoto Annie, and they have not disappointed here. Throughout the majority of episodes, when explanations to the current mysteries are being given, or when someone has come up with a hypothesis, the show moves into what can almost be called experimental animation. It's here where the style differs with each one, giving a unique view to the problem at hand. Of course, that's not the only cool part. Even when we are not in any character's particular mind palace, the show loves to go off on random angles and perspectives that are different from what I am usually used to seeing. Then there are these moments when the show has so much beauty that I cannot even explain it properly with words. It reminds me a lot of a Motoko Shinkai film. Only visually though, as I've never really gotten into the Shinkai plots. They've just not been my thing, but I've always admired how those animations look, and Hyouka can be quite similar at times. A nice complement to all this is, of course, the orchestrations, piano, and flute solos that exist in the show's soundtrack, all of which are quite beautiful in their own right. Now, at present, there is no dub. Hell, the show hasn't even been licensed as I say these words. And it actually makes me wonder why. Perhaps it's stuck in some kind of legal hell, as some other series from Kyoto Annie that have come out since then have made their way stateside, but not Hyouka. I can dream, however, that one day the show will eventually make it to a place on my shelf, but I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself here. I actually found it rather hard to nail down my thoughts on this one because I found it rather difficult to even understand what it was I was watching and then be able to talk about it at any length. People will get interested in this show for the mysteries, they will stay for the characters, and they will walk away with the unique experience that this show gives them, probably with a different view on it than anyone else. There are so many ways to look at this show that it's rather hilarious considering that deep down this show is all about perspective. You can look at it and boil it down to just a mystery anime with slice of life elements and a romantic subplot, if you wish, but it is much more than just that. Though perhaps part of me is just overthinking this, but I really do feel that way. Now, in terms of just pure entertainment, removing all questions of what Hyouka is, and rather how enjoyable it is, it succeeds in many ways, but also fails in some others. Early on in the show, it liked to rely heavily on multi-episode plots that had each their own long and involved mystery that was interesting to watch. Near the end of the show, however, most of the multi-episode plots had been completed and all that was left was a series of one-off episodes that don't really give a satisfying end to the show. It just sort of happens. There's no build-up or anything, it's just the same old, and that's kind of depressing when I hoped for so much more than that, especially considering how the show was at its midpoint. And so, with all that in mind, I present Hyouka with the recommendation to buy it. I know you can't at present, but eventually, if you can, or ever if you find yourself in the situation to do so, I would hope that you consider it. It's worth having for being something different and something uniquely entertaining, even if by the end of it, it might not truly satisfy. Now, at present, and of course by that I mean at the time of this video, Hyouka has not been licensed in North America by any company, which means, of course, you can't purchase it unless you plan to import it from Japan. I am curious, of course, for what an English version of this show might sound like, so one day I hope to find out, if only to satisfy that curiosity. Unfortunately, Hyouka is also not available for legal streaming anywhere, which means this is one of the few cases where a show I recommend can only be watched with fan subs, and this depresses me, but hey, if the fan subs are popular enough, then maybe some enterprising company will license it. Maybe. For alternate anime recommendations, I first point you towards Gothic, a gothic-styled mystery show that actually has some decent conflict and compelling stories to it, even if it might teeter off near the latter half. And secondly, I would also like to recommend Kami-sama no Memocho, or Heaven's Memo Pad as it is referred to here in English. And that one for being quite similar in a lot of ways to Hyouka, but also containing mysteries of a much darker nature. So hopefully between those two you should find something to your liking. And that's it for me. Please subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Follow me on Twitter if you feel so inclined. And hey, if you like what I do here, please consider checking out my Patreon page. Very special thanks to Owen Morris, Bradley Stroder, Dark Crow the First, and JC Green for supporting this video via my Patreon. You guys are all amazingly awesome. And until next time, ladies, gentlemen, and others, stay frosty.